Today at the National Press Club, Rosie Batty, 2015 Australian of the Year Violence Prevention Campaigner and Speaker. She'll talk about what can be done to end violence against women and their children. Rosie Batty with today's National Press Club address.
Hello and welcome to the National Press Club of Australia on Ngunnawal country for today's Westpac address. I'm Jane Norman, a reporter with ABC News and a director here at the club. Well, our guest today almost needs no introduction. Rosie Batty, Domestic and Family Violence Awareness Campaigner, our 2015 Australian of the Year and a published author. Her latest book, Hope, might give some hints as about the theme of today's address. 10 years ago, Rosie Batty suffered an unimaginable loss when her 11-year-old son Luke was murdered by his father. The morning after, Rosie bravely fronted the media, and almost from that moment, she put domestic violence on the national agenda. In the years since, she's somehow risen above this personal tragedy to become one of Australia's foremost campaigners, raising awareness about this national crisis. Well, as we sit here in 2024, you only have to look at the death toll to realise that it is still a crisis. So what has changed in the past 10 years? You can join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @PressClubAust. Our hashtag is NPC. Please welcome Rosie Batty.
Good afternoon, everybody. I know I'm amongst friends and I'm so touched to see you all here today. People have come a long way to be here. I am rather nervous, I'll just put it out there. I have spoken here before, but I have to say, all those years ago, I didn't really know what the press club was. And so they wheeled me out and I very happily spoke. I kind of know what it is now. And I understand the importance of being here and continuing the messaging. And I know that's why you're all here too. You're here in solidarity, you're here in support. And I've gone right off script already. But I did want to acknowledge that you being here and making this effort really means a lot. If I get through this speech without making you cry, I will blame Fiona McCormack because she says I'm a good crier. I don't know what a good crier looks like, but I'm fairly sure that it is emotional, it's touching, and it means a lot. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we gather today, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people. I pay my respects to elders past and present and to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the room or watching today. I also want to acknowledge the incredible strength of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander survivor advocates, in particular Shirley Campbell and the Taganjeri Women's Family Safety Council, who continue to fight fearlessly to end family violence in their communities, and many others who have shown me immeasurable kindness and solidarity throughout my journey. 10 years has passed since my son Luke was murdered by his father. He was 11 years old. That day, I stood before the media, shattered by grief, but determined to speak out against family violence. My story did not fit neatly into the mould of what society expects from a victim survivor. But that's the thing about family violence, it doesn't discriminate. I stand by what I said a decade ago. No matter how nice your house is, or how intelligent you are, family violence can happen to anyone. And each of you gathered here today in this room has been a witness to that truth in some way or another. You are here because you understand the urgency of the situation, because you believe in the possibility of a future where every person, regardless of gender, age, or background, can live free from the threat of family violence. Sometimes I think people forget why they know me, why I'm standing behind a microphone, or why I became Australian of the Year in 2015. I haven't forgotten though, and truth be told, the decade gone by weighs heavily on me in many ways. No day goes by when I don't think about Luke. No awards, no applause, and no accolades will ever bring him back to me. But as we continue to change the story on domestic violence in this country, I take some comfort in knowing that I honour the memory in everything I do. Between many things I've grappled with since Luke's death, large among them is feeling of absolute despair I carry. That despite my campaigns, despite the hundreds of speeches I've made, despite marching, crying, and shouting from the rooftops about family violence, despite a Royal Commission and millions of dollars of resources to prevent violence against women, women and children are still being murdered at an alarming rate in Australia. 1 woman a week is murdered by her current or former partner. Last year, 64 women were killed in incidents of violence in Australia. 64 women with hopes, ambitions, and a place in this world. 64 families devastated. 64 deaths that we as a society could have prevented. Yet regardless of these staggering statistics, many still cling to the misguided belief that violence is an issue that happens elsewhere to other people. But violence is happening in every community, every suburb, and it's happening to people you know. A recent study showed that more than 39% of Australian children were exposed to family and domestic violence. And we know that it is rarely an isolated event. 1/3 reported being exposed to domestic violence more than 50 times in their childhood. How can we let this continue? And where do we look for answers? There's one hard truth staring all of us in the face. Nearly everyone who has experienced violence in this country, mostly women and children, did so at the hands of a man. More than 94% of perpetrators are men. We must hold these perpetrators to account, yes, but we must also instill in our boys something better than this narrow and damaging definition we use to describe real men. This definition tells our sons that they must keep their fears to themselves or be an outsider in our culture. We must teach them instead that being stoic, tough, and in control means nothing without also being compassionate, thoughtful, and kind. That lesson means much more if equality is at the heart of our society. Yes, transforming our culture is a long game, but we must maintain hope. The kindness of other people who've been impacted by grief and violence has kept me going for the last 10 years. The silent language that we share between us. an embrace that lingers a little longer, the warmth of hands enveloping yours, your pain mirrored back in their eyes and in their hearts. Over the last decade, I've spent a lot of time with these people, mostly women. Fierce advocates whose empathy and genuine care has been a light in the darkest times for me. Many of these survivor advocates you already know by name: Anne O'Neill, Ange Barker and Auntie Shirlene Campbell. And some of them are here today. Thank you for being here and being who you are. Because of your determination and commitment to what's right, the way we understand family violence in Australia has changed for good. Hope is not just my story. It's a story of a collective strength of survivors whose resilience and determination motivate us to continue the fight against family violence. It tells the stories of courage in the face of unspeakable violence and the stories of women and children whose names we must promise to never forget. Olga Edwards was a loving, intelligent woman, a lawyer who would have had a voice for powerful and lasting change. Her estranged husband, Jack Edwards, murdered their children, 13 and 15-year-old Jennifer and Jack, in a quiet suburb of Sydney. Not surprisingly, Olga was soon after hospitalised and treated for a severe state of shock. I knew only too well what Olga was going through. The deep tunnel of numbness and unbearable pain her body and mind would enter with no route to escape. I reached out to Olga and had the pleasure of hosting her at my house for a weekend. Olga was happiest when she talked about Jack and Jennifer. Being surrounded by images of them gave Olga comfort, whereas I still struggle to look at photos or videos of Luke. Of course, we shed many tears, but we also had some moments where it wasn't all about being sad and crying. We shared laughter too. 5 months after her children were murdered, Olga took her own life. As a nation, we looked on in horror through the 7-month-long coronial inquest. We all bore witness as it revealed that Olga and the children had endured years of abuse. The inquest found a series of systemic failings, and in the end, the coroner ruled that Jennifer and Jack's death could have been prevented. Olga's was a story like mine that had Australia asking, how many more? How many more Olgas, Jennifers and Jacks will we lose? How many more preventable deaths will we permit? How many more before we realise how deep disrespect towards women and children runs in our culture? In the face of this unimaginable horror and pain, it's easy to become a pessimist. I have, more than once. In times of overwhelming sadness, I will myself to remember that change is already happening and we are making progress. We have seen significant political leadership on gendered violence, family law court reform, and new positive duty laws that ensure employers take action to prevent workplace sexual harassment rather than just responding when it occurs. We have seen critical investment in national monitoring and research mechanisms that support the growing evidence base on how we stop violence before it starts. We have seen the promise of a standalone national plan to address the disproportionately high rates of violence against Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. All these advances are markers of the progress that survivor advocates have campaigned for over decades, and they are worthy of our continued attention. Change must continue through appropriate, secure and continued funding for services across the spectrum of prevention, early intervention, response and recovery. Services like those provided by the legal assistance sector, including community legal centres, that enable access to justice for women experiencing violence. Services like trauma-informed healing and recovery programs that support long-term recovery for victim survivors and help break the cycle of violence. I take pride in being part of the movement towards a safer, gender-equal world where women know their rights and have access to appropriate specialist services. When I was a young girl, I grew up believing, like every other young girl, that it was my own responsibility to be safe, be careful, don't make yourself a target. But we don't tolerate this kind of victim blaming anymore, and the media have had a crucial part to play in this noticeable shift. Telling our stories with empathy and accuracy, by amplifying the voices of survivors, you have contributed to real, tangible change. I truly believe in the goodwill of journalists. You are committed to holding governments and key institutions to account on their promises and to educating the public on the prevalence of family violence in our society. We share a refusal to be silenced. We speak truth to power, and we demand change. And we will continue to work together to educate Australians about the cultural shifts required to end the scourge of gender-based violence. By zooming out from the details of individual acts of violence, we can join the dots and recognise the culture of gender-based violence in which we live. A culture where 1 in 3 men believe that a man should use violence to get respect if necessary. A culture where 1/3 of Australians think it's common for women to exaggerate sexual assault allegations as a way of getting back at men, despite irrefutable evidence against that view. A culture where 2.6 million adults reported witnessing violence towards a parent by a partner when they were a child. Now we know that this violence is not a private matter, shrouded in secrecy behind closed doors, but a public national crisis. A crisis that demands our collective action and attention. Stopping this violence before it starts is everyone's responsibility. We must all work together to create a new normal where everyone is respected as equal. All of the research tells us that gender inequality and violence against women are inextricably linked. They go hand in hand. Every single act of gendered violence begins with disrespect and the belief that women and children are worth less than men. So how do we end violence before it begins? If gender inequality is how violence starts, equality is how it stops. This knowledge forms the basis of primary prevention work. We've seen the power of primary prevention strategies in transforming societal attitudes towards issues like smoking and drink driving. Through public health campaigns, we've shifted the cultural norms that condoned these behaviours to a place where they are no longer acceptable. By educating and empowering individuals to make healthier choices, we've created a ripple effect that has saved countless lives. We can save many more by addressing the drivers of gendered violence and supporting women and children to reach their full potential. Primary prevention is planting seeds for a better future. It is hope. A long-term goal that is laying groundwork so that one day we won't constantly have to put out fires. We must continue to grow a culture rooted in respect and equality to prevent violence from happening in the first place, rather than only reacting to tragedies as they are happening. to create lasting change, ongoing funding for prevention, early intervention, crisis response and recovery are all equally essential. We have seen the impact of equipping our children with the tools they need to build healthy, respectful relationships. Not only are we helping them to articulate what gender equality means in practice, but we are seeing the beginnings of change in school policies, culture and ethos across the country. Now let's commit to listening to children's voices, believing their experiences, and empower them to speak out against violence in all its forms. It's not our children's job to solve this problem, it's ours. Every single one of us in the country. Yes, ministers and journalists, but also parents, friends, co-workers and acquaintances. There are no easy answers, no quick fixes, but all of us together can make a difference. We are on a difficult journey, one that requires balancing reflection and hard conversations about our mistakes, individually and as a society, and learning from them. But we have a responsibility to honour the victims of family violence, to honour Luke, Olga, and the 16 women who have already lost their lives to violence this year, by saying to Australia, we will not tolerate this violence anymore. Saying it through everyday actions that challenge generations of disrespect towards women, and through expert-led media reporting that keeps the perpetrators in view. What we're trying to achieve is massive, multi-generational change, and at times that's overwhelming. But I encourage you all, before you get overwhelmed, just do your part. Promise yourself that next time you see disrespect, you'll call it out. Commit to challenging everyday sexism and know that your words and your actions matter. Talk to the young people in your lives about healthy relationships and consent. Encourage your workplace to review their policies and practices to ensure they are fair and equitable for women. Whether you sit in a boardroom, a classroom or a seat on the bus, you have influence and you can contribute to the seismic shift towards a world free from violence. When we feel powerless, that sets the stage for inaction. I am asking you to commit to warding off that powerlessness and face the very real role we each have to play in stopping family violence. My life changed irrevocably on the 12th of February 2014. Life as I knew it ended that night, and it has and never will be the same again. Through circumstance more than design, I have found purpose and meaning. Becoming Australian of the Year gave me the direction and impetus I needed to keep going. While there are some things I do differently in hindsight, I am proud of what I have achieved in my name and in Luke's name. There are times when I've walked this path alone, and times when I've been carried by the people around me. But at every point, I continue to move forward. Even the smallest step forward is a step closer to ending violence. That's progress. Over the past 10 years, we have seen the thousands of small steps, and it's our job to keep up the momentum and keep up hope. Remember that what we're walking towards is a world where all women and children can lead full, happy, productive lives, free from the threat of violence. As I stand here today, I call upon all Australians to walk beside me on a path to stopping violence before it starts. And to the Australian media, I urge you to keep this conversation alive, to keep championing a safer, more compassionate society. Together, we will create a future where every individual, every family is able to thrive. We must stay hopeful. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. What an incredibly powerful speech. Thank you for being here today. And I think the fact that we have a pretty much full crowd here speaks to the level of support that you and this incredibly important advocacy work has. I wanted to ask you as a first question about some news that kind of broke today. Earlier today, the Prime Minister announced Samantha Mostyn, a Press Club alumni, as the new...
What a great choice.
Well, this is what I wanted to ask you. So our 28th Governor-General, only the second female Governor-General, in her speech today to the media, she actually mentioned the work that she'd done with domestic violence survivors. She's previously described this as one of the most distressing, intractable problems in this country. What hopes do you have for her term as our Governor-General?
Look, I think seeing women in invisible leadership roles is really powerful, and it's inspirational, and it shows, it really shows that women's leadership is really important, and I think that she will be an amazing influence. We have had a fabulous commissioner in Melbourne as well, who has really had a huge influence too. So I think it's a great opportunity. I'm aware of some of the work that she's done with the AFL and her passion and work for gender equality. So I think that gives us a really optimistic and encouraging sign. And of course, this would be strategically decided by the Prime Minister, and he would recognise the importance of that position and the opportunity to demonstrate, talented, inspiring women in leadership role.
Thank you. Our first question today is Sarah Ison from The Australian.
Thank you for your speech today. I just had a couple of questions. My first one was about the Labor government's ambition to end violence against women and children in a generation. I wanted to ask if you think that's possible, but if it's also being matched with the level of ambition you think that's needed. And secondly, you mentioned listening to the voices of children. The Children's Commissioner, Anne Holland, has been calling for some time a dedicated children's minister so that isn't so siloed or is progressed. Do you also think that's required?
I think that's a really great suggestion and a very important step. I'm very proud to be the patron of the Australian Childhood Foundation. Very, very sadly, the CEO died recently, and he was a very inspiring man in the rights of children. And this is exactly the very thing that he also would like to see. So I think that's a really important step, and I think that we should really encourage the government to think that very seriously. I understand that we've appointed somebody in Melbourne, in Victoria, of more recent months. The question around can we, ending this in a generation, how can we aim for less? By making that bold statement, we can pressure government towards that. How can we aim for less? It is possible. Look what happened in COVID. All of a sudden we were locked in our homes, we weren't able to travel, there were laws passed, there were policies made. Amazing what you can do when public health is under threat. We can do this. It is possible. We have, the second national plan, we have leadership. I think what we really do need is an investment of serious funding, long-term funding, to give organisations that work every day towards either the prevention or the early intervention or the crisis response. This is work that takes specialised skill, resources, long-term bipartisan commitment, and a knowledge and a certainty. We will do this. But, I think it's a bold statement, it's an important statement, and we need to keep making the government accountable to this promise.
Can I just ask on the investment piece? I'm a journalist. I hear every day press releases from the government talking about, we've announced this investment in this frontline service. We've done this. So I see it a lot, right? So what is missing here? You're talking about that there's more needed. Can you kind of clarify what does that mean? And does it need to be double? Does it need to be more than just 3 years? Like, what do you mean?
Look, I think we're talking about stopping this within a generation. It's gone all throughout my lifetime and generations of women before us. This problem isn't going away. So we need to make sure that we're investing in the solutions with not just piecemeal scraps of money going into programs and pilots. There needs to be significant strategy. We have done this through other public health campaigns, strategically and over the long haul. I don't have dollar figures I can state, but I think the uncertainty around funding constantly means that organisations and CEOs are struggling to work out how they can rob Peter to play Paul, juggling money that in ways that detract from them being able to really focus their teams and their work on doing what they need to be doing, which is really their work as effectively as possible. So I do think that government sometimes, and I have had that experience, and it was a journalist, Jenna Price, who was very, very smart. Why is the government lying to Rosie Batty? And that contributed to the reversal of funding cuts that they were making in the legal space. Now, I do know from my colleagues in access to justice and community legal centres and women's legal space, we have really overlooked this very important area of work. One of the first things you need to do when you are planning to leaving and trying to rebuild your life is legal support. You need to go to courts. We have failed so many people, and the system has re-traumatised or disadvantaged people in ways that we never intended. So there's enormous amounts of change and work that I think, the appetite is there. We really need collectively to respect each other's expertise, lived experience, voice, professional knowledge, decades of amazing work, and understand the importance that all of these organisations play.
Thank you.
Natassia Chrysanthos.
And I will also say, it's equal, whether it's prevention, intervention, recovery or crisis, it's a multi-pronged approach. All of this has to be taken as seriously and as funded as properly.
Hi, Natassia Chrysanthos from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Obviously in this space we're looking forward and hoping that things get better. But with the Anne Rose survey last year, we saw, more than a third of Australians thought that women use sexual assault as retribution or sexual assault claims as retribution. Anecdotally, you've got teachers who fear a new generation of young boys is being radicalised by the likes of Andrew Tate.
I knew that mum would get a mention.
Yeah.
I was waiting.
A low-hanging fruit. But is there a part of you that fears that things or attitudes in some parts of society are getting worse, and there has been this so-called backlash against the last 10 years or so of activism? And then on a related note, in your speech you also said, the hard truth is that men are the perpetrators of most violence against women and children. I think most people who have been in rooms like today look around and men are few and far between. Reflecting on your last 10 years in this space, how would you summarise or reflect on the engagement of Australian men in this conversation?
Look, it's very tiresome having to always explain that we don't believe all men are violent, that we're not feminist Nazis, that we don't hate men. But men need to step up. They're committing the majority of the violence. Men need to be great examples of respect and regard to their sons, to their nephews, to their children. So many male allies, so many male allies. I have great support and great friendships with men. There are many men that are allies. How do we reach men? Well, I know Our Watch is also working with organisations in sporting codes. We no longer condone inappropriate behaviours off the pitch. We are holding the culture to account. That is important progress. We're all looking, and that is huge influence and huge change. Are we there yet? No, but we are making men in those dominating areas of our society accountable. Similarly, you are more likely now, through very important work and the horrendous experience that people like Brittany Higgins have gone through, to have accountability for sexual harassment in workplaces. When I was a young person, you just wore it. The leering of your boobs as you were, and the inappropriate touching. Where were you going to go to complain? It was kind of not normalised. It was something that you had to put up with. But what I will say is the Andrew Tate of this world seems to be alive and well and being very much mentioned. I think it's just, it's a conversation around him, but there are so many inspiring young people who understand and accept homosexuality and gender fluidity in ways that we're still trying to get our heads around. That's enormous progress. That's driven by young people. So the important thing, I believe, is acknowledging this is a huge issue. How do we reach and influence young people? Well, we need to really invest in ways that we do that and understand. But I think that's where you see the threat of progress. The threat of progress is bringing out all of this resistance and pushback. Women were much safer when we knew our place, when we didn't aspire for anything more than being grateful for the traditional roles that we had. Now we know that we have visions, we have aspirations, we aim for what brings us joy and satisfaction, and we are bringing up our daughters to aspire and to understand the same. But there is still a lot of influence of the patriarchal society that we are entrenched in. We can't see it because we're part of it. There's as much resistance from my female friends at times who are uncomfortable about the conversations they feel that shouldn't be directed at their sons. So how do we? Well, we need to have those critical conversations with our young people, but, and we need to stop putting barriers in place for our schools to be able to run, respectful relationship programs and have those critical discussions. And kids, they seek to be treated with respect and regard as well. And so, there were a lot of, again, resistance from parents who may not understand the genuine intention behind respectful relationships. And, so everything comes from a position of fear about change. And I keep wondering, what are we fearful of? Because the world is such a happier, better place with us all being able to reach our potential, to not have barriers that we're hitting against all of the time, and to be supportive and encouraging of each other. So I think there is a real understanding that social media and the reach to our young people, whether it's pornography through their mobile phones. I was horrified recently to understand that young men see choking as a sexual act that's normalised. And where are these conversations? Where, this isn't going away. So we do need to really understand how do we reach people young people where they are at. And by listening to them, learning from them. They are inspiring, and if there is something that gives me hope is when I meet those young people and I hear their intelligence and their clear vision, and they hold us to account, and we get really uncomfortable because we think it's political correctness gone mad. They keep us to account, and I think that that's what I also like to acknowledge is how much hope I see in young people when they are not just given the tools but can critically examine what is it like to be masculine. We call it toxic masculinity, but that's perhaps not helpful. It's like harmful masculinity. That narrow definition of such isn't helpful to men. And some of the research that I believe the Jesuits have done in the Manbox program survey have really demonstrated those men and those influences are more likely to use violence, more likely to have suicidal thoughts. So, you know, how we engage with young people is engaging with them. And I don't think we can do it early enough.
Thank you.
Julie Hare from the Australian Financial Review.
Thanks, Rosie. It was a privilege to hear you speak. You say that family violence doesn't discriminate, but in a way media organisations do, and that the instances of family violence and death that come to account tend to be photogenic white people.
Yeah.
Can you speak to me about that, whether it's a distorted view of the conversation or whether just having the conversation out there is a good thing?
I think, you know, I've been doing this for 10 years and I have increasingly become aware that the reason my story was so horrific, one, it was a young boy that was murdered at cricket practice that hadn't been done before, but I was a white privileged middle class woman. I defied those stereotypes. I wasn't that person that they expected me to be. That's the only reason I had cut through, because people stopped in their tracks. I'd also done a diploma in community welfare, so I had a theoretical understanding of family violence. So I was informed, not just from my own lived experience. I'd already unpacked those myths through my own education. Somehow I knew what to say that day. And I think that's the thing. We are still believing that it happens to other people, not in this nice little street, not to my neighbours, not to people like me. I think that's, you know, part of that. And often I will hear people say, I don't know anybody, I don't know anyone that would do such a thing. Not my son, not any of his friends. And I think, well, 94% of men are committed, you know, are the perpetrators of this violence, and 1 in 3 women experience violence. There is a high likelihood that somebody you know, if they're going to experience violence, are likely to be perpetrators. So what do they look like? I never anticipated Luke to be at risk from being killed. I never imagined. I imagined a father harming his child would be one that was abusive and neglectful and a nasty man, horrible to his kids, not somebody that was hardly protective and loving and would go to the ends of the earth for him. Still can't work that one out. But the desire for power, control and revenge, I understand, is the driver behind that. So I think that we do need to really understand what do different ways of abusing and controlling women look like. And there are many in very influential and high positions who would be controlling their wives financially, threatening them through the court system. And we do know still that those most successful in a court system are those with the deeper pockets, potentially. And one of the passionate things I've campaigned for in my own way with Women's Legal Service and community legal centres has been access to justice. I didn't have the money to pay for lawyers. What I did do was either self-representation or the fear of something that I could, you know, and I know the worst outcomes are those that haven't had good legal support and advice from the beginning. So I do feel my journey over the past 10 years has made me greatly appreciate that some women, because of their colour, because of their age, because of their disability, because of their culture, will experience other forms of discrimination and abuse that I will never know. and we do need to put it out there. And as people across organisations looking to support women in crisis and recovery, we also have to look at our unconscious bias, because we're all, I think, still learning so much, and we learn through those people that we seek to listen to who've had those experiences. You know, I will never know what it's like to have my visa hanging over my head or not have any rights and no benefits and no support except some charitable model that may just help me. And the degree of isolation and abuse those women are experiencing defies belief. So I think, you know, you're absolutely right. Acknowledging that Aboriginal women disproportionately experience violence. And that's not, you know, the culture of violence is not Aboriginal. We know that. The effects of colonisation, racism, all of those drivers. So I think it's our job still to not let those people who are experiencing violence be swept aside, to not be seen, to have no voice. We need to make space for them.
Thank you.
Tess Economou.
Thank you very, very much for your time today. I just wanted to touch back on the issue of attitudes in our society. We mentioned Andrew Tate before, but we're seeing a lot of videos actually promoting what are considered to be traditional gender-based roles, and a lot of this content is being made by women. Where do you think this is coming from, and why are women being part of this push that are promoting these attitudes?
I have friends that I find it very difficult at times, that I can't really speak as frankly as I would like to, or what conversations can I have that don't make me sound to alienate. So I think these are really challenging, particularly with people that you know and you're close to, and family members. Exactly. I guess this is the thing, we are changing. What I thought was normal, and how I grew up as a little girl, as I said, taking responsibility for safety. I can't remember any conversation anyone ever said to me about you could get raped and murdered if you go out late at night or walking back to your car. I just knew, I've known all my life that, but I think it took me a while not to see that it was not my fault, that actually I should be able to wear whatever I want, go wherever I want. It wasn't my fault. It was for men to stop raping and murdering. So we are shifting and changing in that, but it's very gradual. And I guess, when I look at the women and generations that come before me have been traditional roles, and I guess that change for some, is quite. Some have more traditional views, and I guess we all feel challenged or threatened by change that's impacting on us. Not everybody wants to be that career-minded person. I think there's a lot of conversation still that fears feminism. So I think it's about, again, learning and conversation, and giving people take time, and then all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but I know from across my lifespan, my dad never went to the birth of his children, has never changed a nappy. That was women's business. All of the men that I know who are fathers are wanting to be invested in their children. They want to be hands-on. They want to share in the parenting. They want an increasing role in their children's life. And I think that, that shifting and changing of gender roles it's not apparent for everybody. But I think, even Disney, they're influencing through different heroines and heroes and all the rest of it, and how they've constructed their movies. So we are influenced. But I think when we feel threatened, either because of our religious beliefs or whatever it may be, we dig in. We're a bit resistant. we may misunderstand, we may not realise. And I think most people don't wish harm, that their behaviours or views are harmful. I know that for me, the people in this room and the people I know, I love the conversations I can have and the reassurance that I can get because we are of like mind. But not everybody is in a progressive environment, not everybody is influenced, but we are influenced by our workplaces and the culture there and the examples that we see. So why is it that we're all part of change? And I think I find it perhaps more distressing when I come across the resistance from women, because I think we all feel like we're all like-minded, but we're not. And that's all I can say, really. We're all on a journey. We're all on a journey.
Now, we still have a fair few journalists who are seeking to ask questions, so if I can ask all of our reporters to please stick to one question so everyone can have a go. Our next question is from Claudia Long.
Hello, Claudia Long, ABC News. Thank you very much for your speech today, but also for everything that you've done over the last decade. Thank you. You mentioned before... Yeah.
I wish I had all the answers.
No.
There's a whole stack of people here could be going, I could answer that. I wish I could say that.
I think you might have an answer to this one. So you mentioned before, during COVID, we saw this rapid response. For example, we saw people housed effectively in emergency accommodation overnight, like that. But we don't seem
realistic Centrelink payments. And what have we done? Everything we learned, everything we solved, back.
Have disappeared.
Take the money, take off the accommodation. It's really, really disappointing to see what a compassionate, what a necessary solution that we could find, and then to see that reversed was quite sad.
And it seems like that kind of urgency just doesn't seem to be here on this issue, even though, the government has said they're very serious about it. It seems like every budget cycle there are women's frontline organisations that have to beg for money and fight for money. The budget's coming up soon. What does the government need to do to show you where their money is where their mouth is?
Who would like to answer that question?
Not spend it on something.
Very good answer, Claire. Very good answer. The threat of terrorism is more likely to occur in your own home, where you are supposed to be safe. So this is difficult because women's voices struggle to be heard, to be taken seriously. We over-exaggerate. That's the rhetoric. So we need to keep being noisy. We need allies. We need to be loud. We need to be strong. We need to be unified. The way that our funding is distributed, it does not encourage collaboration. It does not really encourage us all working together. We're kind of competing with each other, scratching around, trying to gather stuff. And I've often wondered, when I first came into this, I said to Peter Stahl, who was my media advisor back then, I can open any door in Australia as Australian of the Year, but I don't know which doors to open and who's standing behind me. And I don't know what to ask for. And why is it there's no one at a federal level? Like, where are these people that I knew that Fiona McCormack and others at a peak body in Melbourne and Ken Lay and others were in the government's ear demanding change, doing what they could, but I couldn't see who was doing that in Canberra. I'm not suggesting they weren't, but that's not what I could see. And so we started a Never Alone campaign, which was successful on some family law court reform issues and things like that, and reversal of funding cuts and stuff, because I felt that collective really can speak truth to power and have and not be swept away. So I guess we need to be combined with and in that time I have seen great work happening across our financial institutions. They get a bad rap, but they've done some brilliant work. The Commonwealth Bank has done some brilliant work, and I know Westpac are as well in this space with some of the people here today. Aligning with corporate organisations who are also have a responsibility to their customers, to their workforce, in how they support people in their organisation that may be experiencing domestic violence, not just with annual leave, entitlements, etc., but how do you support somebody that may be struggling? Because if you're an employer of 60,000 people and 1 in 3 women are going to be experiencing violence in some, you do the maths. You have a responsibility and an obligation to also provide a safe space for your workplace. And so, seeing that responsibility increase and the awareness of what these organisations can also contribute to makes us all more powerful. And, I'm really proud of the Victorian government and the leadership they've shown over 10 years. It's not perfect, we still have a long way to go, but the Royal Commission had enormous influence and effect, and the progress there has been incredible. Back 10 years ago, I think we had 227 recommendations, $1.9 billion. It made everything that the feds were doing look embarrassing. I meet people today that I met all those years ago, and their organisations now don't just employ 1 or 2 people. They employ 20 or 30 or 50 or 100. They've grown significantly, sadly, because they need to. And I'm not suggesting that means that they still have enough staff or enough money, but the scale of this issue is so enormous. So we really do need to not let them off the hook, keep them accountable. That's where you as journalists do great work with us, and that's really important, and I've always appreciated, I think, the importance of working with media, because that's how we make speak truth to power, make governments accountable and hold them to account.
Since you just spoke so glowingly about journalists, would you be happy to go a little bit over time today to continue answering questions from the journalists on the list?
Sure.
Okay, wonderful. Thank
Is there anybody else that would like to answer any of these questions?
No, you're more than worthy of this stage. Our next question is Shalala Medora.
Thank you so much, Rosie. And to your point about the media, when I started as a junior burger journalist, I remember violence against women being reported in quite salacious, true crime sort of style, often couched in, how could a nice guy commit such acts of terror against people they supposedly loved. Thankfully, in the last 10 years since Luke died, I feel like that's becoming more and more rare.
Yeah.
In part thanks to you for calling out shitty journalism when it occurs. But I was hoping you might be able to reflect on what you think we're still doing badly and what we could improve on.
Gosh, I don't see all the journalism because it's really uncomfortable to read and watch, but I do think it's a real challenge with the pressures of social media and misinformation and propaganda. I think journalism is in a really dire stage that I value it more and more, and I believe that the journalists I do read and the literature that I read is evidence-based and reliable. What was the question?
Better.
I knew I'd do that at some point.
What we can do better as journalists
I think,
in this space.
Understanding that I'm sure this expertise isn't just, it continues to need to be developed. And I know that Our Watch have a really good resource to inform journalists, and I think that's a really important part, to think you've got your journalistic skills, but what you don't know everything. And I know that a lot of the unintended messaging wasn't intended to create harm or make things worse. So I think it's really important to know where are those expert resources, so that the stats are accurate, but how you can continue to build your journalism and continue to improve. And as we were talking before, how do you create space and regard and respect for women who are perceived as less newsworthy, that they also deserve dignity, respect, and their story and their challenges and their journey to be reflected. And so I think that's really important as well, and not just cherry pick the ones that are perhaps, as we were talking about, the more likely ones. Everybody has their story, and everybody's leaving people that love and care for them. And there are many people. I was in Ipswich last week, and the room was full, and there were a lot of people who'd come to see me because of their experience of family violence. And there were a lot of victim survivors who had gone on to really make, great lives. So it's not all doom and gloom. We go on to rebuild our lives, benefit from the experiences we've had, because we're channeling our lived experience and expertise in ways that we know can make change, and working alongside of organisations that create that space and opportunity for us to be able to work with them, because they realise that that's so important. So I guess, making sure that before you approach an incident, how can I position this in an educational way that brings society on a journey of learning, rather than, as you said, that sensationalised way that achieves very little and, if anything, creates more harm. Thank you.
Our next question is from Nick Stewart.
In your speech, you actually mentioned the goodwill of journalists, which I think demonstrates a touching naivety or perhaps simplicity, given the experience that you've had. But what I'm also wondering is, how do we actually, as journos, how do we get this to register? Do we need to start giving tallies of women who have died in the same way as we do the stock market reports every day? Do we need to focus on issues like the intersectionality more? What is it that we can do to improve the journalism that is covering this vital issue?
Look, I think I'm not sure how much these days we see it, but we always were very clear on the death toll on the roads. We're very clear, I think, on workplace safety and the incidence of workplace fatalities. I'm not sure that's the entire answer, but I think it's really telling that it's a feminist organisation that is keeping the tallies of those women who are murdered. And I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done in how we reflect that.
Because the numbers are horrific.
Yeah, and how do we? I'm not saying that is how we do it, but I think, how do we keep this issue in the public eye? How do we bring people on the journey rather than desensitise, make people switch off? I think that's really difficult. But I do think where there is genuine will, there is opportunity. And I do think, there is some really good journalism, and I read some pretty good articles. And so I think, we definitely need to keep building on that. Before I lost Luke, my understanding was it didn't make headlines. I was that person that, I can remember Andrew Rule, he more recently did another article mentioning the 10-year anniversary where he was one of those journalists, and he was a hardened journalist, and he couldn't believe what he was hearing, and it touched everybody that day. And so I think, journalists see crap. Journalists see the worst. You know, what's happening right now overseas in the Ukraine, in Israel and Gaza, it is horrendous. You know, journalism takes a lot of bravery to do, you know, and I think that not being afraid of holding things, you know, people to account is sensitive and difficult. And I don't, you know, all I can encourage is working with not just Our Watch, there are other organisations, but how do you use your journalism more effectively? What can you do as a sector and an industry to be better at educating and unifying and bringing community along? Because that's so important. So thank you. And don't let those, you know, those people who wiggle out, the ones that say inappropriate things, you know, hold them to account. Be them the Prime Ministers or whoever.
Good advice. Melissa Code.
Hi, Rosie. Thanks for your talk. Melissa Code from the Mandarin. You mentioned the importance of access to justice and the legal support systems that sort of are like institutions that wrap around victim survivors of family violence. And a huge number of the matters which come before the Federal Circuit and Family Court of Australia involve allegations of family violence.
Yeah, I think it's the majority.
Given the Chief Justice is here in the audience,
I know.
What do you have to say to him about what the institution can do to better address?
Look, I am very hopeful because I think after periods of great resistance and inactivity, we now have leadership that recognises the very important role of the Family and Federal Circuit Court. There is a long way to go in changing that system. It will take time. I think my understanding is that the majority of people that end up in that system are those who are experiencing family violence. So that realisation places great responsibility on how they respond and handle people coming through. They now have their own evidence base, and I think that will be really informing their work as well and holding themselves to account. So I feel that there is great opportunity. Again, we need to continue to drive that change by sharing stories of the experiences that have worked against us, that have put children at risk, that have continued to place them in harm's way because a decision has been made for the perpetrator for continued access to their children. I think that has been the most heartbreaking thing for me, is the damage that we do to children by not listening to them, by not believing them and not having, you know, so whether it's through the family law court, whether it's through child protection, you know, we have so much work to do to understand that to stop violence, to change violence, we have to really understand the transgenerational effects that violence permeates through children's lives. Even if they're not directly impacted, what they see, what they observe is life-changing for them forever. It doesn't guarantee they turn into perpetrators or victims, but there is a higher likelihood. And the trauma for a child to be in a household where violence is being used is traumatic, and it affects their mental health, their ability to learn, everything about them and everywhere they go. And what we tend to, you know, what we do in some situations is remove them and then place them into positions where they are more likely to be abused, violated, and become harmed. So I think, you know, that for me is a really important waking up, that we are not addressing our response to children.
Our final question today is Eleanor Campbell. We have literally a couple of minutes left, so over to you.
I'll keep it simple. Hello, thank you for your address. Eleanor Campbell from NCA Newswire. I have a question about your own personal experience as a victim survivor. Given all the work you've done over the past 10 years, what is the biggest misconception people have about you still, and what biggest gaps in knowledge do we have about survivors? And, what do we need to address to drive meaningful change?
Look, I think I had a very unique journey through a horrendous thing that happened to me. I wear that experience in a way that people were so horrified. And then I guess through my own ability to harness a lot of my strengths and skills and things like that, I somehow have been able to be that person that is a keynote speaker. I've developed through time how to not just share my story, but to do it in a way I think that really reached people. And I've had many people come to me who have heard me speak, whether they are a bank, whether whatever area that they're in, who were compelled to go back to their work, to their role, to their influence, and do something. And so I have, over the years, people coming to me and say, because we heard you speak here, this has now changed. We are now doing this. So I feel incredibly fortunate that and that's really what happened with being Australian of the Year. It gave me a platform. Thank goodness I had some ability to speak, because I didn't have any training. I was just put up there. And that was really, really difficult at times. But I knew it was a moment, I didn't know how long it would last for, where so many people could support me and we could create a momentum for change that couldn't be stopped. And I do believe that we did make some changes into the way we talk about family violence. And I have people sharing all those things with me all of the time. So I feel very fortunate that here I am 10 years later, the statistics of one woman a week being murdered is still appalling, it's still confronting, it's still overwhelming. But because people share with me what I've had some influence in, I feel my journey's been worth it. I'd trade it for a second. If I could do anything to get looped back, I would. But it's given, so I do know some people who want to be heard, and who've got every reason to be frustrated and angry and disappointed, may not get the same opportunities, may not find the same response, which can really make you think that change isn't happening, nobody's listening. And it can be a really lonely journey. So I think that, what I found is that there is a lot of work to do where we understand how to work with people with lived experience effectively rather than tokenistically, and how we all respect what we bring to the solution. And I think that I continue to learn from people all the time, and hopefully some people have learnt some things from me. But yeah, I think we're all compelled to not want to do this because we want it to stop. We don't want other people to have to go through what we've been through, either being financially ruined, losing our house, losing our children, living in fear, because when we decided to leave, there was no security in that decision, because the violence doesn't end necessarily. So, and in some instances that can be worse. So I think it can be a lonely journey. So many of the people here today have come alone from Melbourne, from Sydney, to be here, to feel that they're not alone, to feel that they are also, that their experience counts for something.
Rosie, thank you for your time today. We're so grateful for this address and all that you do. Please accept this gift of membership to the National Press Club, and please join me in thanking Rosie Batty.